I was arrested at work, humiliated in front of everyone, after being framed for stealing from my own family's company. And the people who set me up were my wife and my brother. They'd been having an affair behind my back and cooked up a plan to ruin me so they could take my job, my home, and my life. My parents took their side without a second thought, and while I was rotting in jail, they moved in together like I never existed. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how far I'd go to tear their perfect little fantasy apart. Hey, before we move on to the video, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Thanks. It's been 6 years, and I still don't know how to explain what happened without sounding like I'm making it up. Every time I try to tell the full story, I see that look in people's eyes, that tightening of the jaw, that polite half smile like they're wondering if I hit my head somewhere along the line. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. But I need to get this out. Not because I want pity. God knows I'm done with that. But because I know someone out there is where I was, in the middle of being gaslit, torn down, and betrayed by the people you're supposed to trust the most. If that's you, this story is for you. I'm 37 now. This all started when I was 31. Back then, I had a wife, a house, a job working at my father's company, and a sense of safety I didn't even realize I was lucky to have. I wasn't flashy or exciting. I wasn't the guy you looked at twice at a party. But I worked hard, loved deeply, and thought that would always be enough. My wife, Samantha, was the kind of woman people remembered. Charming, funny, a little unpredictable in that she'll keep you on your toes kind of way. We met in college, and while I always felt a little out of her league, she insisted she loved how solid I was. That was her word for me. Solid. We got married when I was 26. Bought a house 2 years later. We had been trying for a baby for about a year before everything fell apart. My brother Jake, on the other hand, was the opposite of me in almost every way. He was loud, charismatic, reckless. My parents adored him. Always had. He's just got that spark. My mom would say whenever he got caught doing something he shouldn't, like crashing a car drunk or blowing thousands in Vegas. Spark, right? He had all the spark and none of the consequences. We both worked at my father's business, a regional logistics company. Dad started it from nothing and built it into something real. Jake worked in sales, which mostly meant drinking with clients and golfing. I worked in accounting and logistics, the boring stuff. The stuff that actually kept the company running. My relationship with Jake was complicated. I loved him because he was my brother, but I never quite trusted him. There was always something calculating behind the charm. Something cold. But I kept those thoughts to myself. It wasn't worth the fallout. My parents made it clear early on that Jake was the sun around which the rest of us were supposed to orbit. Samantha and Jake always got along, maybe a little too well. But I chalked it up to them both being social types. Jake was a groomsman at our wedding. He gave this wildly inappropriate speech about how he could have had her first if he'd tried harder, and everyone laughed like it was some cute joke. Samantha laughed too. I didn't. I should have paid more attention to that moment. The beginning of the end started small. Samantha grew distant, more phone-locked, more working late, more irritable. When I asked if something was wrong, she said I was being clingy, that she was under pressure, that I needed to give her space. Jake started hanging around more, coming over late, bringing wine and stories about how insane the clients were getting. Samantha always lit up around him. I told myself not to be jealous. This was Jake. He was family, and Samantha was my wife. What could possibly go wrong? I kept working, kept my head down. We were in the middle of closing out Q4, and my father was unusually stressed. There were some discrepancies in the books, he said. Maybe just accounting delays. Maybe something more. You'd tell me if anything was off, right? He asked one morning, coffee in hand, not looking at me. Of course, I said. Because I would. That's the kind of person I am. Or was. Back then, I still believed that honesty mattered. Then came the audit. At first, it was just routine. An internal check. Then it got serious. Accounts weren't balancing. Money had been moved, large sums, in patterns that looked deliberate. The kind of patterns that scream embezzlement. I stayed late every night trying to figure it out. Samantha didn't ask questions. Didn't seem interested. She was always out with friends or visiting her sister. Then the investigators found something. The bank transfers were traced back to my login credentials. My email was linked to authorizations. My access card had been used to enter the server room during unauthorized hours. They said I stole over $600,000 from the company. I laughed when I first heard it. I honestly thought it was a mistake, a bad joke. But my father didn't laugh. He looked at me with this cold, sad expression, the same one he used when our dog died when I was a kid. I didn't do this, I said, panic rising in my throat. He didn't respond. Jake was sitting across from me in the office. He looked uncomfortable, not angry, not shocked, just vaguely sympathetic, like this was all a shame. He didn't defend me, didn't even say a word. I turned to Samantha, who was sitting beside him. Her face was blank. I reached for her hand, and she pulled away like I was diseased. That was when I knew something was very, very wrong. That night, I was suspended from work pending a full investigation. The next morning, I was arrested. My own mother wouldn't pick up the phone. I remember the sound of the cuffs clicking shut around my wrists. That metallic snap is burned into my memory. The way the arresting officer avoided my eyes, like he didn't want to look at me as a human being. I wasn't violent. I didn't resist. I barely spoke. But they still walked me out of the office in front of everyone. People I'd worked with for almost a decade, like I was a criminal. I spent 48 hours in county jail before I was arraigned. My court-appointed lawyer, a guy who looked barely out of law school, said I should consider a plea deal to avoid jail time. I told him to go to hell. I didn't steal anything. I didn't even know how to pull off something like this. I wasn't some mastermind. I was just the guy who stayed late to balance the books and make sure the trucks went out on time. The bail hearing was humiliating. My parents didn't show. Jake didn't show. Samantha didn't show. Not even a text. I sat there in a wrinkled shirt from 2 days ago, listening to a prosecutor describe me as a calculating white-collar criminal who abused his access and his family's trust. That one stung. I couldn't stop thinking about how smug Jake looked when I last saw him, just sitting there, not saying a word, like this wasn't even his business. Eventually, I scraped together bail with the help of a former college friend who lived 2 states away. He wired me what he could, called me the next day, and told me to get out of that town. I didn't listen. Not yet. I stayed in a cheap motel near the industrial park, the kind with cigarette burns on the blankets and a door that didn't quite lock right. I spent most of my time pacing, staring at the ceiling, or combing through old spreadsheets and email logs on my laptop, looking for any clue to prove my innocence. It didn't make sense. The logins, the timestamps, the access. It was all too perfect. Like it had been planned for months. I called Samantha. Straight to voicemail. I texted her. Please, I need to talk. I didn't do this. No response. I tried again. Nothing. It took me 4 days to find out she'd moved out of our house. It wasn't even from her. It was from our neighbor, Mary, a kind older woman who used to wave to us while gardening. She left me a voicemail saying she hoped things work out and that it's a shame Sam and Jake had to go through all this too. Sam and Jake. I played the message 5 times before it really registered. Then I threw my phone at the wall so hard it shattered. They didn't even wait. They didn't hide it. My wife and my brother were together now. The betrayal hit me in layers, like frostbite working its way in. At first, it just felt cold and numb. Then the burning started. Then came the sickness. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing every moment where I trusted them. Every shared meal, every conversation, every smile. And now, all of it felt like a lie. My lawyer called, said the case was moving forward. They had evidence, bank records, digital footprints, security locks, all linked to me. All too perfect. He asked me, is there any chance you made a mistake and don't remember it? That's when I hung up. I knew I didn't do it. But the walls were closing in, and everyone I cared about had already decided I was guilty. Samantha had deleted our wedding photos from her social media. Jake had posted a selfie with her, captioned New Beginnings. Like I was already dead. I went back to our house once. I had a key, but the locks had been changed. I stood on the front steps for a while, not sure what I was hoping for. Maybe that Samantha would come out and explain it all, say it was a mistake, say she missed me, say something. But she didn't. The blinds stayed shut. Jake's truck was in the driveway. I left before I did something I'd regret. That night, I seriously thought about ending it. I stood outside the motel, looking at the railing from the 2nd floor, wondering if it would hurt to fall headfirst onto the pavement. I thought about writing a note. Thought about leaving everything behind in a clean, ugly package so no one would ever have to hear my name again. But I didn't jump. Something inside me, some stubborn ember, refused to die. If they were going to burn my life down, I'd make damn sure they didn't get to dance in the ashes. I decided I was going to find out the truth. It started with the security locks. The company claimed my badge had been used to access the main server room during a weekend when the funds were moved. But I remembered something that same weekend. Jake had asked to borrow my laptop. Said his was fried after a coffee spill. I hadn't thought twice about it at the time. He gave it back 2 days later. I still had the laptop. Still had the same hard drive. So I started digging. I wasn't a tech guy, but I knew someone who was a friend from high school who now ran a small IT business out of his basement. I called him, asked for a favor. Told him I needed help looking at old files, metadata, whatever he could find. He didn't ask too many questions. Just said, bring it over. When I arrived, he plugged it in, ran a few programs, and then frowned. There's a bunch of deleted files that don't match your usual activity. Weird stuff. Like they were moved, copied, and then scrubbed. Can you recover them? Give me a couple hours. I waited in his garage, chain-smoking cigarettes I hadn't touched in years. When he came back, he had a flash drive in hand. You're not gonna like what's on this, he said. He was right. There were spreadsheets, versions of the company's financial records, edited to hide certain transactions. The metadata showed they were last modified using my laptop, but the timestamps were when I wasn't even home, cross-checking it with photos I had taken from a friend's birthday party. One file included an autofill field filled with the username jake.sat before being overwritten. There were also screenshots, emails drafted from my account, saved as .pdfs. One of them even had my signature pasted, like a goddamn cutout. And then, the nail in the coffin, a shared Google Doc between Jake and an account labeled S@Rose88, Samantha's old burner email she used for coupons and junk. The document was titled Exit Strategy. In it, they talked about how Jake would take over the narrative at the company, how Samantha would distance slowly and frame it as emotional incompatibility, how they'd remove me from the picture cleanly and legally. I felt sick. I read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Jake and Samantha hadn't just cheated on me. They had framed me. Deliberately. Methodically. They wanted to destroy me so they could take everything I had built and walk away smiling. But now, I had evidence. I wasn't powerless anymore. I took the flash drive to my new lawyer the next day, not the public defender, but a real one I'd hired using what little savings I had left. He didn't say much while reviewing the files. Just nodded slowly and then said, "We're going to destroy them in court." For the first time in weeks, I believed it. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I walked into that courtroom with fire in my chest. I didn't wear a suit. I wore the same dress shirt I'd been arrested in, cleaned and pressed, but unmistakable. I wanted them to remember. I wanted Samantha and Jake to see me and feel the weight of what they did. They were already there when I arrived, sitting at the other end of the aisle like the king and queen of the world they thought they'd stolen. Jake wore an expensive navy suit, his hair styled like he was heading to a damn photo shoot. Samantha wore a muted gray dress, minimal makeup, wedding ring already gone. She looked through me like I wasn't even there. They didn't smile. They didn't nod. They just watched. Like I was something beneath them. Like I was pathetic for still fighting. But I had the flash drive. I had the truth. My new attorney, Lisa, was brilliant. Cold, clinical, and precise. She took the evidence and built a timeline, a narrative, a weapon. She filed a motion to dismiss the charges based on new information. The judge approved a hearing to review the evidence. The prosecution squirmed. They weren't ready for this. They had built their entire case on circumstantial evidence tied to company data and security logs. But once Lisa started showing how easily those logs could be manipulated and how my laptop was accessed remotely at times I could prove I wasn't even home, their case began to buckle. Then came the real bombshell. Lisa subpoenaed the digital history of Jake's email accounts. She got access to the shared Google Doc, the one labeled Exit Strategy, and had a forensics expert verify its authenticity. Not only was it real, but it had been edited from Jake's devices and from Samantha's location history. Jake's face went pale when it was read aloud in court. Samantha didn't blink. She crossed her arms and stared forward like she was at a dentist appointment. But the courtroom reacted. Audibly. A few jurors exchanged glances. Even the judge tilted forward like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. We introduced timestamps, IP addresses, metadata. The whole ugly story laid out like a rotisserie chicken in front of a hungry crowd. Jake and Samantha hadn't just orchestrated a theft, they had collaborated, step by step, to ruin me. To remove me from the business, from my marriage, from my life. They had used love as a tool and family as a weapon. And then the final dagger. Lisa brought in a private investigator who had been following Samantha and Jake for the past 6 weeks. He presented photo evidence of them living together, bank records showing shared expenses, a recent house listing they had both signed off on, a joint savings account opened in both of their names 2 weeks after I was arrested. The courtroom went dead silent. Jake shifted in his seat, sweat visibly gathering at his hairline. Samantha, for the first time, looked nervous. It was over. The judge didn't even need deliberation. The charges against me were dropped on the spot. The court ruled that the case had been built on manipulated evidence and that I had been the victim of a malicious, coordinated framing effort. Lisa then filed a civil suit against Jake and Samantha for defamation, malicious prosecution, and emotional damages. I walked out of the courtroom that day a free man. But I didn't feel free. Not yet. It took time to rebuild. I didn't move back home. I sold the house. Or rather, I had it legally reclaimed from Samantha through the civil suit, then flipped it and used the money to start over in another state. I cut off contact with my family completely. My parents never apologized. Not once. In fact, my father told me, even if you didn't do it, you clearly weren't strong enough to stop it. That was the last time we spoke. I spent a year in therapy. Another year living in a 1-bedroom apartment and working warehouse jobs to pay bills while the lawsuit against Jake and Samantha crawled through the legal system. I didn't date. I didn't socialize. I needed to learn how to exist again on my own terms. Then came the settlement. Jake and Samantha didn't want this going to court. Too much exposure. Too much risk. Their reputations were already in the gutter. Jake had been forced to resign from the company, and Samantha had been fired from her marketing job after the story went semi-viral in our region. Turns out, people don't like working with liars and frauds. They offered a settlement, $1.3 million. I took it. I didn't want their money, but I wasn't stupid. I took every cent and used it to build something better. I started a business. A real one. Logistics, but modernized. Better systems, better ethics, better people. I employed veterans, single parents, people with records who needed second chances. We didn't just work, we grew. In 3 years, I turned my life around. And then, one morning about 5 years after it all began, I got a message. It was from Samantha. Just, can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. A few hours later, Jake texted too. Hey, I know I messed up. Can we meet? I didn't respond to either of them. Because I don't owe them closure. They didn't want the truth. They didn't want a conversation when I was being cuffed and humiliated in front of my coworkers. They wanted me erased, replaced, forgotten. So no, I didn't call. I didn't write back. But I did drive by their house once. A little 2-bedroom starter home in a crumbling suburb on the edge of the city. It was nothing like the place we'd once lived in. Their cars were old. The yard was dying. Jake had lost everything. My father cut him off. Their spark had fizzled out once real life kicked in. Samantha hadn't remarried. They weren't even together anymore, from what I'd heard. It didn't make me happy, exactly, but it gave me peace. Sometimes, karma doesn't need help. Sometimes it just takes time. But sometimes, you've got to dig your heels in, claw your way out, and make damn sure the people who buried you know you're still breathing and thriving. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button.